After years of being treated like the family disappointment, I finally cut them off. Now my drug-addicted sister is desperate for my help, and my parents are demanding I drop everything to save her. For years, I was the overlooked child, the one my parents never truly valued. My older brother Nathan was their pride and joy, the perfect, academically gifted son who excelled in everything he did. Outgoing, charming, and always in the spotlight, Nathan was the student body president, the valedictorian, and the star athlete of our school. My parents basked in his achievements, showering him with praise and proudly telling everyone about their golden child. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. Meanwhile, I was just me, the quiet one, the introverted kid who preferred the glow of a computer screen over socializing, who spent hours immersed in coding and video games instead of going to school events. I wasn't interested in being the center of attention. I found comfort in the digital world, where I could solve problems, create things, and explore limitless possibilities. To my parents, this wasn't something to be proud of. In their eyes, I was wasting my time. "It's unhealthy to sit in front of a screen all day," my mom would say. "Why can't you be more like Nathan? He's making something of himself." I was never praised for anything I did, even when I showed them something I had built, whether it was a program I coded from scratch or a high-ranking achievement in a gaming competition. It was dismissed as insignificant. "That's not a real skill," my dad would say. "You'll never get anywhere playing games all day." I remember one particular incident when I was 14. I had just won an online coding competition, placing in the top 5 out of thousands of participants worldwide. I was excited. I thought maybe this time they'd finally acknowledge me. I printed out the certificate and showed it to them at dinner. "That's nice," my mom said flatly, barely glancing at it. "But you know, Nathan just won the regional debate tournament. Isn't that incredible?" Just like that, my achievement meant nothing. The conversation shifted to Nathan's latest victory, as it always did, and I was forgotten. At school, I didn't mind being the quiet one. I had a small circle of friends who understood me, who shared my interests. But at home, it was impossible to ignore the contrast between me and Nathan. My parents practically worshipped him. They threw extravagant parties for his birthdays, attended all his events, and spoke of him as if he were the next great leader of the world. Meanwhile, my birthdays were barely acknowledged. If I was lucky, I'd get a casual, "Oh, happy birthday," in passing. The worst part was that Nathan never defended me. He wasn't cruel, at least not directly, but he never once stood up for me when our parents belittled me. He never said, "Hey, you know, he's really smart too." He just let them believe what they wanted to believe, that I was the disappointment of the family. 3 years ago, at Nathan's graduation party, my parents took things to a whole new level. It was supposed to be his big night, a celebration of his achievements. I had no problem with that. He worked hard, and he deserved it. But during their speech, my parents turned it into something else. They stood in front of everyone, family, friends, and relatives, and after praising Nathan endlessly, they started joking about me. "You know," my father said with a chuckle, "we probably should have stopped after having Nathan. Second-borns rarely turn out to be anything special." The room filled with laughter. My mother chimed in, adding, "Imagine how much more successful Nathan would be if we didn't have to waste time and resources on, well, distractions." She gestured vaguely in my direction. The worst part? Everyone laughed. No one objected, not even Nathan. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter what I did. I would always be an afterthought to them. Then, as if to drive the point home, they announced they had bought Nathan a brand new car as a graduation gift. The entire room cheered. Meanwhile, I sat there invisible, knowing they would never do the same for me. After the party, I confronted them for the first time. I told them how much their words had hurt me, how they had spent my whole life making me feel like I wasn't good enough simply because I had different interests. They laughed it off. "You're too sensitive," my father said. "It was just a joke." Then he looked me in the eyes and said, "Besides, what do you expect? It's not like we have anything to be proud of when it comes to you." That was it. That was the moment I knew I was done. I stopped trying to earn their approval. I poured all my energy into what I loved, gaming. I started coding, designing, and developing my own projects. If they thought I was wasting my time, I was going to prove them wrong. 2 years later, I was accepted into my dream college on a full scholarship, not for traditional academics like Nathan, but for game development. I had built something for myself without them. When I told my parents about my acceptance, they barely reacted. My mother just said, "Well, it's a good thing you got a scholarship. We never saved anything for your college anyway." That confirmed it for me. They never expected me to succeed. They never planned for me to have a future. So, I packed my things, left, and never looked back. But leaving wasn't as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. My parents didn't want me there, but they also didn't want me making a decision that put them in a bad light. It wasn't about whether they cared, it was about control. When I told them I was leaving for college, my mother barely reacted. She kept her eyes on her phone and muttered, "Oh, okay, well, good luck with that." My father, on the other hand, looked irritated, as if my decision was somehow an inconvenience to him. "You're being ridiculous," he scoffed. "Just because you got a scholarship doesn't mean this is a good idea. Gaming, tech, do you really think you'll make a career out of this? It's a fad. You'll come crawling back when you realize you need a real job." I expected some sort of goodbye, even if it was cold. Instead, my father sighed, shook his head, and went back to reading the newspaper. My mother didn't even look up. When I started packing my things, my parents made no effort to help me. No, "Let us know if you need anything." No, "We'll miss you." Not even a fake attempt at acting like they cared. Instead, my mother made a point to remind me that I wasn't taking anything they had bought. "You can take your clothes and your laptop," she said flatly, arms crossed as she watched me. "But everything else stays here. We paid for it." I stared at her, stunned. My gaming setup, the one thing that had kept me sane in that house, the thing I had built over years with prize money and freelance work, was something I had earned. Yet because they had given me the desk it sat on, the chair I used, and a few minor accessories, they claimed all of it as theirs. My father, always the condescending one, smirked. "Well, if you're so successful now, you should be able to buy it all again, right?" It was a final jab, a last attempt to make me feel small, and it worked, for a moment. But then I realized something. I didn't need things to prove myself. I had built my success from the ground up once, and I could do it again. So I left. I took my essentials, walked out of that house, and never looked back. They didn't call, they didn't text, they didn't check in, and honestly, I didn't expect them to. For the first few months, I struggled. I had to rebuild everything from scratch, buy a new setup, find a part-time job, balance my studies with work. But for the first time in my life, I was free. There were no backhanded comments, no constant comparisons, no one dismissing my achievements. At first, the adjustment was overwhelming. I lived in a tiny apartment near my college, barely managing to cover rent with my part-time job at a tech repair shop. Every penny I earned was carefully budgeted between food, tuition expenses, and rebuilding my gaming setup. I worked late nights, fixing broken hardware for extra cash, while spending my free time studying and honing my skills in game development. But unlike my childhood, where every effort was met with disapproval, here, my work actually mattered. My professors saw my potential. My classmates respected me. I had friends who didn't look at me like a failure, but as someone with real talent. Slowly, everything began to fall into place. I started taking on freelance programming gigs, small projects at first, debugging games for indie developers, assisting with UI design, even doing esports coaching on the side. My reputation in the gaming community grew. Soon, I was making real money, enough to upgrade my gear and even save up. By my second year in college, I had co-developed a small mobile game with a few classmates. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it gained traction online, earning us more recognition and some decent profits. I reinvested everything I made, learning more, creating more, networking with industry professionals. By my third year, a startup gaming company offered me an internship. Within months, they recognized my skills and offered me a paid position. While Nathan had quit his corporate job to chase his dream of starting a business, only to burn through his savings, I was steadily building my own success from the ground up. By the time I graduated, I had already lined up multiple job offers, but I didn't need them. My own projects were thriving. I had my own game in development, with a loyal online following anticipating its release. I had partnerships with other developers, investment offers, and enough income to support myself comfortably. Most importantly, I was happy. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I didn't feel lesser. I wasn't the shadow of my perfect brother. I was my own person, carving out my own path. And the best part, I did it without my parents. I wasn't the failure they had written me off as. I wasn't the waste of time they thought I would be. I was successful, I was independent, and I was free. 5 years passed without a single word from my parents. No calls, no messages, no last-minute attempts to patch things up. It was as if I had never existed in their lives. And honestly, I was fine with that. During those years, I had built everything they once told me was impossible. My gaming career had taken off. I wasn't just some kid playing games in his room anymore. I was a developer, a creator, a respected figure in the gaming community. The indie game I had been working on became a massive success, earning me enough money to not only live comfortably but invest in new projects. I had a small but talented team, a growing audience, and the financial freedom to work on what I loved without answering to anyone. I had made it. Then, out of nowhere, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line, urgent. We need to talk about Nathan. At first, I almost ignored it. I had no interest in reconnecting, but curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. The email was from my father. It's been a long time and we regret how things ended, but we need to talk. Nathan is in trouble. He's struggling financially and he needs your help. We're hoping you can step in and support him during this difficult time. That was all it said. No apology, no acknowledgement of the years of silence, just a demand, as if I owed them something. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. After all this time, after completely cutting me out of their lives, they still only reached out when they needed something. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I did what any rational person would do. I looked into what was going on. A quick search told me everything. Nathan's business, his dream project, had failed. Badly. From what I could gather, he had taken massive loans to fund his company, assuming it would be a guaranteed success. But the product flopped, investors pulled out, and debt started piling up. He had lost his house, his savings were drained, and apparently, he had even been forced to sell the car our parents had gifted him years ago. And now, he was broke. But as I kept digging, I found something even more interesting. Nathan wasn't the only one who had bet everything on his so-called dream. My parents had too. I found records of their financial investments, news articles, and even old press releases where they had publicly supported Nathan's venture. They hadn't just encouraged him, they had funded him. Every dime they had saved, every asset they could spare, they poured into his company. They truly believed their golden child was destined for greatness, that his success was inevitable. They took out loans, sold off investments, even refinanced their house, all to make sure Nathan had everything he needed to succeed. And what did Nathan do? He burned through it. Every cent, lavish office space, expensive marketing campaigns, high-end furniture, and overpriced consultants. He lived like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company before his startup had even turned a profit. And when things went south, when customers didn't bite and investors started pulling out, he had nothing left. Neither did my parents. Their entire financial security, everything they had built for decades, was gone. And now, they finally remembered me. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted the way they treated me, but because I had money. The son they once dismissed, belittled, ignored, was now the only one who could save them. I sat there staring at my father's email, shaking my head in disbelief. I could already picture their conversations before they reached out to me. The hushed, desperate whispers, the realization that their favorite son had failed them, the reluctant, bitter acceptance that the other son, the one they had written off, was their only hope. A few days after I sent my reply, my phone rang. I almost didn't pick up. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me knew. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally answering. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a hesitant voice. "It's me," my mother said. I didn't respond right away. It had been 5 years since I last heard her voice. 5 years of silence, and now, here she was, acting as if this was just another casual conversation. "We need to talk," she continued. "This situation with Nathan, it's serious. We're struggling. We need to support each other. We're family." I almost laughed at the word, family. Where was this family when I was growing up, when I was constantly compared to Nathan and told I wasn't good enough? Where was this family when they laughed at my dreams, dismissed my passion, and told me I would never amount to anything? Now, suddenly, we were supposed to support each other. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone tighter. "Family?" I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "That's interesting, because for years I wasn't treated like family, I was treated like an afterthought." My mother sighed, her voice taking on that familiar, exasperated tone. "I know things weren't always perfect, but we did our best, and right now we need you. Nathan needs you." "No," I corrected her. "You need my money. That's all this is about, isn't it? You didn't care when I left. You never reached out. And now, when you're in trouble, suddenly you remember I exist?" She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, hear the way she was searching for the right words to manipulate me like she always had. "This isn't just about money," she finally said. "Nathan is going through a difficult time. He's your brother. You wouldn't be where you are today without us. We raised you. We gave you everything." I cut her off. "You gave me nothing except years of being treated like a failure. The only reason I'm successful today is because I left. Because I stopped trying to win your approval and started building a life of my own." There was silence on the other end. Then her voice turned cold. "So that's it? You're just going to let your family suffer? I'm not letting anyone suffer, I replied. Nathan made his choices. You made yours. And I made mine. And my choice is to keep you all out of my life. Her voice wavered. We're your parents. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment. It used to, but not anymore. And then, for the first time in years, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I hung up, I blocked her number, and I finally moved on.